The Grand Council station hung silent above the border world of Keth, a place built for peace talks and nothing else. Its halls were white and cold, lit by soft blue light that made everyone look tired. Here, for the first time in 10 years, humans and the Galactic Empire would sit at the same table. General Elena Voss walked through the main hall with steady steps. She was tall, with short gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Beside her walked General Sarah Chen, younger but just as sharp, her hands folded behind her back. The third general, Marcus Holt, followed a step behind. He was quiet, always watching the doors and the guards, counting exits out of old habit. They wore no weapons. This was a peace summit and the rules were clear. Only words would be used today. The Empire's delegation waited in the Great Hall. At its head stood Grand Marshal Threx, a tall alien with silver skin and cold yellow eyes. He did not stand to greet them. He watched the three humans enter and did not hide his contempt. "So these are the ones who speak for all of humanity," Threx said to the officer beside him. "Three tired old soldiers in nice uniforms." The officer laughed quietly. Threx did not. Elena bowed her head, polite but not weak. "Grand Marshal, thank you for meeting with us." "Sit," Threx said. It was not a request. The humans sat. Around them, cameras from a dozen worlds recorded every second. This summit would decide the future, war or peace between two civilizations that had fought for a decade and lost too much. For 2 hours they talked. Elena spoke of borders and trade routes. Sarah spoke of prisoner exchanges. Marcus said little, but when he did speak, his words were careful and exact. The Empire's negotiators pushed hard, testing them, looking for weakness. They found none. The three generals gave ground where it made sense and held firm where it mattered. They did not raise their voices. They did not lose their temper. To the watching cameras, they looked calm, almost too calm. Threx leaned back in his chair and studied them. "You people are strange," he said. "Your empire once burned 2 of our fleets in a single day, and yet here you sit, asking for peace like beggars." "We are not begging," Sarah said quietly. "We are offering you a choice." Threx's eyes narrowed. "A choice given by the weak means nothing." "Then test us," Marcus said, still calm, "but I would not recommend it." A tense silence filled the room. One of the younger Imperial officers shifted in his seat, uneasy. But Threx only smiled, a thin, cold smile. "Careful, General," that almost sounded like a threat. "It was a fact," Marcus replied. The talks continued through the day. By evening, both sides had agreed on the basic shape of a treaty, not perfect, but enough to stop the killing. Elena felt a small, careful hope. 10 years of war, and maybe, just maybe, it could end here. That night the human generals were given quarters on the station, guarded by their own small honor guard, unarmed, as agreed. Elena stood by the window looking out at the stars. Sarah joined her. "You think they'll actually sign it?" Sarah asked. "Threx won't like it," Elena said. "But the Empire's council wants this war over. Even he can't fight that alone." "He's not alone," Marcus said from the doorway. He had a strange look on his face, the same look he wore before difficult missions. "I've been watching his aides all day. Something's wrong. They keep looking at the exits, counting guards." Elena turned from the window. "You think this is a trap?" "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that Threx doesn't answer to the council the way we were told. I think there are people here who never wanted peace." Sarah frowned. "The treaty signing is tomorrow, in front of every camera in the quadrant." "Exactly," Marcus said. "The perfect place for a message." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said what all three of them were thinking but had not said aloud. "If something happens to us tomorrow, the doctrine activates." The room went still. "It's been asleep 12 years, Sarah said softly. "We built it and then we prayed we'd never need it." "We didn't build it to be used," Elena said. "We built it so it would never have to be." Marcus looked out at the stars, his jaw tight. Let's hope Threx's council still has more sense than he does. But none of them slept well that night. Morning came and the great hall filled once more. This time it was crowded. Imperial officials, human diplomats, reporters from a dozen worlds, all gathered to witness history. The treaty sat on a table between the two delegations, waiting for signatures that would end 10 years of war. Alina stepped forward first, as was her right as senior officer. She picked up the pen and looked at Threx. "Shall we end this war, Grand Marshal?" Threx did not move for a long moment. His yellow eyes swept the room, the cameras, the crowd. Then slowly he stood. "Yes," he said, "let's end it." He raised his hand. It was not a gesture of peace. Armed guards, hidden among the honor escort, stepped forward with weapons that should not have been in the room. Alina's eyes went wide. Sarah reached for a weapon she did not have. Marcus was already moving, already shouting a warning. But it was too late. The hall filled with screams. Cameras kept recording, capturing everything, broadcasting it live across 100 worlds without any way to stop it. Grand Marshal Threx watched with cold satisfaction as 3 of humanity's finest generals fell to the floor of the great hall, their blood staining the white tile. "Let this be a lesson," Threx said to the cameras, his voice calm and proud. "The Empire does not bow to weakness. This is what happens to those who think themselves our equals." He turned and walked away, leaving the room in chaos behind him, believing he had just proven the Empire's strength to the entire galaxy. He did not yet understand what he had truly done. Millions of light years away, in a quiet, unmarked facility buried deep beneath a human colony world, a dormant system stirred. Screens that had been dark for 12 years flickered to life. A single line of text appeared on every monitor in the room, glowing red in the darkness. "Baba Yaga Protocol, ACTIVATD." An old officer, gray-haired and half asleep at his post, stared at the screen in disbelief. His hands trembled as he reached for the comm. "Command," he said, his voice shaking. "Command, wake up, it's happening. Get me the fleet, get me everyone. The witch has woken up." Across 100 hidden shipyards, across fleets disguised for over a decade as merchant convoys and mining outposts, alarms began to sound. Ships that had waited quietly in the dark, built and hidden by 3 generals who never wanted to use them, began to stir. The peace was dead. The Baba Yaga was awake. The old officer's name was Yuri Bon, and he had guarded this facility since before it was built. 12 years he had waited in the quiet dark beneath colony world Ashworth, watching over machines he prayed would never wake. Now they screamed red light into the room, and his hands would not stop shaking as he keyed the command channel. Within minutes, every senior officer in human space was pulled from sleep, from meetings, from dinner tables. The message was the same for all of them, 3 words that had not been spoken aloud in over a decade. Baba Yaga is awake. Fleet Admiral Diane Akafer received the call in her office on Earth. She was a stern woman in her 60s, one of only 4 people alive who had known the full truth of the doctrine since its creation. She listened to the report in silence, her face growing pale. "Confirm the trigger," she said quietly. "Confirmed, Admiral," Yuri's voice answered. "All 3 creator signatures have gone dark simultaneously, Generals Voss, Chen, and Holt. The system registered it as," he paused, his voice breaking slightly, "as a coordinated kill." Akafer closed her eyes. She had known Alina Voss for 30 years. They had trained together as young officers, fought together in the war's worst years. And now Alina was gone, murdered on camera in front of the whole galaxy, and the machine she herself had built to prevent such a thing had already begun its work. "Can it be stopped?" Akafer asked, though she already knew the answer. "No, Admiral, that was the whole point. It doesn't wait for permission anymore. It doesn't wait for orders. The generals built it to move on its own, specifically so no one, Not even you could hesitate or be pressured into stopping it. Akefer opened her eyes. Then God helped the Empire. Across human space, the story exploded like wildfire. The footage of the execution had already reached every world, every screen, every child's tablet. People wept in the streets. Others raged, smashing windows, burning imperial flags where they found them. But beneath the anger was something colder. Something that had been building for 12 long years, without most citizens ever knowing it existed. Because the truth was this: the 3 murdered generals had not simply been diplomats. They had been the architects of humanity's deepest secret. 12 years earlier, after the worst battles of the war, Elena Voss, Sarah Chen, and Marcus Holt had come to a quiet, terrible conclusion. Humanity could win small battles, but it could not win the war outright, not through strength alone. The Empire had more ships, more worlds, more resources. If the war continued as it was, humanity would eventually be worn down and destroyed. So the 3 of them built something else instead. Not a bigger fleet, not a stronger gun. They built patience. They took their best ships, hundreds of them, and hid them, disguised as merchant convoys, buried inside asteroid mining stations, sealed in dormant shipyards on worlds so small the Empire never bothered to scout them. They trained secret crews who lived double lives, farmers and traders by day, soldiers who never forgot their true purpose. And they built the Baba Yaga protocol, a system that would only wake if the 3 of them died together in a way that could only mean betrayal. It was insurance, a promise that no matter what happened to them personally, humanity would not be left defenseless. And it was also a message, though only 3 people had known to send it: if you strike us down without honor, something far worse than our fleet will answer. Now, aboard a hidden shipyard drifting in the dark between 2 dead stars, the first ships began to wake. Captain Idris Malu stood on the bridge of the Quiet Fury, a heavy cruiser disguised for a decade as a slow, unremarkable ore hauler. He had commanded this ship since it was sealed away, running fake cargo routes, filing fake reports, growing old with a crew who trained in secret every single night after their public shifts ended. He had begun to believe the day would never come. "Captain," his weapons officer said, staring at her console, "systems are online, all of them. Weapons, engines, cloak, everything we buried is awake." Idris looked at the view screen, where dozens of other cargo ships around him were shedding their disguises, revealing sleek gray warships beneath. 12 years of waiting, and now it was time. "Autopilot vector, sir," his navigator said, voice tight. "Coordinates are already locked. We're not choosing the target. The protocol already picked it." Idris nodded slowly. Somewhere far away, an algorithm built by 3 dead generals had already selected the targets that mattered most. Not civilian worlds, not innocent bystanders, but the specific military commanders and political leaders responsible for the betrayal at Keth Station. "Then let's not keep it waiting," Idris said. "Bring the ship to full power, drop the disguise." Across 100 systems, the same order was given 100 times. Merchant ships became warships. Mining stations opened their hidden bays and released fighters that had been sleeping for over a decade. Slowly, silently, without a single public announcement, the largest hidden fleet in human history began to move toward the heart of the Galactic Empire. Back on the Council homeworld, Grand Marshal Threx addressed his people, proud and triumphant. Broadcasts played across every Imperial world, showing the execution footage on a loop, framing it as a great victory. "The humans postured as our equals," Threx declared to a cheering crowd. "Today we have shown them the truth. They are not our equals, they never were." But not everyone on the council cheered. Councillor Vesakine, an older and more cautious Imperial leader, watched the broadcast with a deep, uneasy frown. She had studied humanity for decades, had read every intelligence report the Empire possessed, and something about this bothered her greatly. "Grand Marshal," she said carefully when they spoke privately after the broadcast, Did our intelligence services ever explain why humanity, a species with such devastating early war tactics, suddenly became so passive these last 12 years? Why they stopped expanding? Why their military spending seemed to vanish from our reports? Threx waved a hand dismissively. They grew soft, content with what little they held onto. Or, Vesa said quietly, they were building something we couldn't see. Threx did not answer her. He turned back to his victory broadcast, confident and unworried. He should have listened. 3 days after the executions, the first reports began arriving at Imperial Military Command, reports that made no sense at first. A shipyard on the border world of Deltrix Prime, one used to build and repair Imperial warships, had gone silent. All communication lost. No distress signal, just silence. Then a second shipyard on the far side of Imperial space went dark the very same hour. Then a third. Threx received the reports with mild irritation, assuming equipment failures or minor accidents. He ordered investigation teams sent to each site, still confident, still certain that nothing serious could threaten the Empire so soon after crushing humanity's spirit. The investigation teams arrived to find the shipyards intact, untouched, structurally whole. But every warship docked within them had been disabled with surgical precision. Weapons systems destroyed. Engines dead. Not a single Imperial soldier killed, not a single drop of blood spilled. Just a message, left behind on every monitor at every site, glowing in the same cold red light. This was a warning. The next visit will not be so gentle. Threx stared at the report in his hands, and for the first time since the executions, a small, cold seed of doubt began to grow in his chest. Far away, aboard the Quiet Fury, Captain Idris Malu watched the tactical display as more ships across his fleet reported successful, bloodless strikes on secondary Imperial targets, warnings only, precise and controlled, exactly as the protocol demanded. This was only the beginning. The real targets, the ones responsible for the deaths of 3 generals, still waited ahead. Position report, Idris said quietly. 2 days from primary target, Captain, his navigator answered. The Grand Marshal's home fleet. Idris nodded once, his jaw tight with old grief for 3 people he had never personally met but whose foresight had just saved everyone aboard his ship, and would soon deliver justice on their behalf. Then let's not be late, he said. The witch doesn't like to be kept waiting. Grand Marshal Threx stood in the war room of his flagship, the Dominion's Will, staring at a star map covered in warning markers. In the 6 days since the executions at Keth Station, 17 Imperial military installations had gone dark. 17. All disabled without a single Imperial casualty. All left with the same cold message glowing on their monitors. This is not war, said Fleet Commander Rask, a broad-shouldered officer who had served under Threx for 20 years. War kills people. This is something else. It's a message, Threx said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Cowards hiding behind clever tricks. Counselor Vesakine stood at the back of the room, arms folded, watching the map with growing dread. She had asked to be here, and Threx had allowed it only because dismissing her publicly would look bad after his recent losses. Grand Marshal, she said, stepping forward, I would like to share something my research team uncovered if you will permit it. Threx waved a tired hand. Speak. 12 years ago, Vesa began, shortly after the Battle of Corvath Reach, humanity's military spending appeared to drop by nearly 60%, according to our intelligence estimates. At the time, our analysts believed this meant humanity was exhausted, running out of resources, perhaps close to surrender. That proved true enough, Rask said. They came begging for peace, didn't they? Did they? Vesa asked. Or did they simply stop showing us anything? My team went back through a decade of shipping manifests, trade records, colony reports. There are gaps, Grand Marshal. Entire mining operations that received massive shipments of raw materials and never once reported exporting a single finished product. Colony worlds with populations too small to explain their listed industrial output. She placed a data slate on the table between them, showing a star map of human territory with dozens of systems marked in red. "I believe," Vesa said quietly, "that humanity did not stop building ships 12 years ago. I believe they stopped telling us about the ships they were building." The room went silent. Even Rask, who had mocked the idea moments earlier, stared at the map with new unease. "That's not possible," Threx said, but the words sounded thin even to himself. "We would have seen something, some sign." "We saw exactly what they wanted us to see," Vesa said. "A tired, cautious people who wanted nothing more than peace. That was never weakness, Grand Marshal. That was patience. And patience, when it finally runs out, tends to arrive all at once." Threx said nothing. Outside the viewport, stars burned silent and distant, indifferent to empires and their mistakes. Far across the void, deep within what the Empire had always assumed was ordinary human territory, the truth Vesa had guessed at was already fully awake. What she could not have known was the scale of it. The hidden shipyards had not built a modest reserve fleet. They had built an army meant to end a war in a single, overwhelming stroke, not through numbers, but through precision, patience, and 12 years of quiet preparation. Aboard the Quiet Fury, Captain Idris Malu walked the ship's corridors, past crew members checking weapon systems that had waited 12 years for this moment. Many of them were young, born after the war's worst years, trained since childhood for a mission they never expected to actually fly. Others were old veterans like Idris himself, who remembered exactly why this fleet existed. He found his old friend, Chief Engineer Priya Nair, working in the engine room, running final diagnostics on the ship's cloaking drive. "Everything holding together?" Idris asked. "Better than expected," Priya said. 12 years of sitting still, and she still runs like new. The generals built these ships to last." Idris nodded. He had known Elena Voss personally, decades ago, back when they were both young lieutenants fighting in the war's early battles. He remembered her calm voice in the middle of chaos, her refusal to ever raise her voice even when giving orders that would send people to their deaths. "You knew her, didn't you?" Priya asked, watching his face. "General Voss." "A long time ago," Idris said. "She once told me something I never forgot. She said the strongest people she ever knew weren't the loudest ones. They were the ones who could absorb every insult, every provocation, and still choose the right moment to act instead of the easy one." "Sounds like this whole plan," Priya said quietly. "It is the plan," Idris said. 12 years of insults. 12 years of the Empire calling us weak, calling us cowards, calling us beneath them. And we let them believe it because it bought us the time we needed. He looked at the tactical display, where his fleet moved steadily closer to their next target, one of 3 massive shipyards responsible for building and maintaining the Empire's frontier war fleet. This was no longer a warning strike. This was the beginning of the true campaign. "Position report," Idris called out. 6 hours from target, Captain," the navigator answered. "Imperial patrols show no indication they've detected us." "Good," Idris said. "Let's keep it that way as long as we can." Back on the Dominion's will, Threx received word of the human fleet's approach far too late to properly prepare. Sensor ghosts had been spotted near the frontier shipyards, but Imperial technology, built to detect large hostile fleets through their engine signatures and hull mass, simply could not see ships designed from the ground up to mimic harmless civilian traffic. "How is this possible?" Rask demanded, staring at the incomplete sensor data. "Our detection grid should have caught something this large days ago." "Because it wasn't built to catch it," Vesa said grimly. "Everything about this was designed specifically to slip past exactly the kind of detection we rely on. They didn't just build ships, Commander. They studied us. They knew exactly what our sensors could and couldn't see, and they built around it. Threx slammed his fist on the table. Then we adapt. Recall every available fleet to defend the frontier shipyards immediately. Grand Marshal, an aide said nervously, entering the room, we've just received word. Shipyard Kelnos 9 has gone dark. Recall the fleets. Grand Marshal, the aide interrupted, his voice shaking now. Kelnos 9 wasn't disabled like the others. It's gone, completely destroyed. No survivors. The room fell into stunned silence. Threx stared at the aide. I thought this enemy left no casualties. They did not, Grand Marshal, the aide said quietly. Until now. The message left behind states that Kelnos 9 was the shipyard responsible for repairing and rearming the specific strike team that murdered Generals Voss, Chen, and Holt. The room understood, all at once, what this meant. The earlier strikes had been warnings, bloodless, controlled, meant to demonstrate capability without provoking full war. But the humans had drawn a line, and anyone directly connected to the executions at Keth Station now sat on the other side of it. Vesa spoke quietly into the silence. They aren't attacking the Empire, Grand Marshal, not yet. They are hunting the people responsible for what happened at Keth, precisely, deliberately, one target at a time. Then all we need to do, Rask said slowly, is find whoever is coordinating this and eliminate them. Cut off the head. Vesa shook her head slowly. You didn't listen to what I told you. There is no single head to cut off. This was designed to run without one. The 3 people who built it are already dead. It doesn't matter now. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need orders. It simply carries out what they designed it to do, and it will not stop until it's finished. Threx looked around the war room at his officers, at the star map covered in more warning markers than it had held that morning. For the first time since ordering the executions at Keth Station, he understood, with a cold and sinking certainty, that he had not crushed an enemy's spirit that day. He had ended 12 years of restraint. Prepare the home fleet, he said quietly. All of it. If they intend to come for me personally, I want to be ready when they arrive. Vesa said nothing, though privately she doubted readiness would matter much at all. She had read the reports. She had seen how precisely the strikes had unfolded, how completely the human fleet had avoided detection, how deliberately each target had been chosen. This was not a wild, angry lashing out. This was 12 years of careful planning finally being executed exactly as intended. Somewhere far across the stars, aboard a hidden fleet still gathering strength with every passing hour, Captain Idris Malu received new coordinates from the Baba Yaga's central protocol, the next target, and the one after that, each one chosen with the same cold precision as the last. He looked at the list a long moment, then turned to his crew. New orders, he said. The frontier shipyards were only the beginning. Set course for the Empire's inner systems. It's time the Grand Marshal learned exactly what he unleashed. The fleet moved on, patient and unstoppable, carrying forward the will of 3 generals who had given their lives so that humanity would never again be underestimated. The Empire's inner systems had never seen war. For 300 years, the core worlds had been protected by layers of frontier defenses, buffer zones, and allied fleets, safe behind so much distance and so many guardians that most citizens living there had never once considered the possibility of an enemy fleet appearing in their sky. That safety ended on the 7th day after Keth Station. Captain Idris Malu watched the tactical display aboard the Quiet Fury as his fleet dropped out of hidden transit lanes directly into orbit above Voss Threnody Station, the Empire's largest shipbuilding and command facility, named ironically enough after an old Imperial admiral, and now about to become infamous for an entirely different reason. All ships report ready, his weapons officer said. Cloak holding until your order, Captain. Idris studied the station on the display, a massive structure bristling with defense platforms, home to nearly 40,000 Imperial personnel. And according to the Baba Yaga's targeting data, the primary coordination point for the strike team that had murdered Voss, Chen, and Holt. Order from command is clear, Idris said quietly. Military and command personnel only. Minimize civilian casualties. This is a strike against those responsible, not a massacre. Understood, Captain. Drop the cloak. Bring us to attack position. Aboard Voss Threnody Station, alarms began screaming through the corridors as 40 ships materialized in perfect attack formation. Weapons already locked onto predetermined targets. Command centers, defense platforms, communication arrays, while deliberately avoiding residential and civilian sections entirely. Station Commander Yeth Orav barely had time to reach the command deck before the first strikes hit. He watched in horror as precision weapons fire tore through his defense grid with surgical accuracy. Disabling exactly the systems needed to defend the station, while leaving life support and civilian quarters completely untouched. They're not trying to destroy the station, his tactical officer said, disbelief plain in her voice. They're trying to capture it. Belay that, Orav snapped. Return fire all batteries. But the batteries were already gone, disabled in the opening seconds of the attack by strikes so precise they seemed almost surgical. Within 20 minutes, Voss Threnody Station's entire defense capability had been reduced to nothing, and human boarding craft began docking at predetermined access points. What followed was not a battle. It was a methodical, disciplined operation. Human strike teams, trained for over a decade in scenarios exactly like this one, moved through the station with practiced efficiency, securing command centers, detaining military personnel, and broadcasting the same message to every screen aboard. This station provided coordination support for the assassination of 3 unarmed diplomats at Keth Station. Personnel not directly involved in that operation will not be harmed. Full cooperation is advised. Commander Orav, cornered in his own command center by human soldiers who had not fired a single unnecessary shot, stared at the message in stunned disbelief. You knew exactly what to hit, he said quietly to the strike team leader, a young lieutenant with tired eyes and a controlled, professional manner. You knew exactly where to go, exactly what to avoid. How long have you been planning this? Longer than you'd believe, the lieutenant answered simply. Please stand down, Commander. This doesn't need to go any further than it already has. Word of the fall of Voss Threnody Station reached Grand Marshal Threx within the hour, and with it came a wave of panic that spread through the Imperial Council faster than any battle report before it. This was not a distant frontier shipyard. This was the heart of Imperial military coordination, captured almost bloodlessly by a fleet that, by every measure the Empire possessed, should not have existed. Recall the home fleet, Threx ordered, his voice tighter than before. All of it, full mobilization. Grand Marshal, Vesa said carefully, may I suggest an alternative course? I am done listening to alternatives, Counselor. This ends with force. With respect, Grand Marshal, force is exactly what got us here. Vesa stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Every strike this fleet has carried out has targeted only those connected to Keth Station. They have avoided civilian casualties at every turn, even when it clearly cost them tactical advantage. This is not an invasion, Grand Marshal. This is retribution carried out with remarkable discipline. And if I simply let them take whatever they want, Threx snapped, let them humiliate the Empire in front of every allied and rival power watching. I am suggesting, Vesa said carefully, that we consider what they actually want, because I do not believe it is our destruction. If it were, Grand Marshal, we would already be dead. Threx stared at her for a long moment, some of his fury giving way, however briefly, to genuine uncertainty. Aboard the Quiet Fury, Captain Idris Malu received new orders through the Baba Yaga's coordination network. Orders that confirmed exactly what Vesa had guessed. The fleet's next targets were narrowing. Secondary personnel, minor commanders, distant accomplices, all were being removed from the target list. What remained was a much shorter list, one that led directly toward a single individual. Commands narrowing the target parameters, his weapons officer reported, studying the update. New primary objective just came through. Idris read the coordinates and felt something settle heavily in his chest. Not satisfaction, not quite, but something close to it. The Grand Marshal's flagship. The Dominion's Will, his navigator confirmed. Currently stationed at the Imperial Home Fleet's primary staging point. That's the most heavily defended position in Imperial space, Priya said from the engine room comm. Even with everything we've got, that's not a small target. It's not meant to be small, Idris said quietly. It's meant to be the end of the list. He looked around at his bridge crew, all of them waiting on his order. General Voss once told me something else a long time ago. She said justice delayed is not justice denied, so long as it eventually arrives complete and certain. 12 years is a long delay. He turned back to the display. Let's make sure it arrives complete. The full Baba Yaga fleet, now numbering well over 300 ships gathered from a dozen separate strikes across the Empire, began converging on a single point in space, the Imperial Home Fleet's primary staging ground, where Grand Marshal Threx waited with everything the Empire had left to throw at them. It was, by any conventional measure, an uneven fight. The Imperial Home Fleet numbered nearly 1,200 warships, backed by planetary defense platforms and decades of established doctrine. The human fleet, even at its full strength, was outnumbered nearly 4-1. But Threx's officers had not accounted for one crucial fact. The Baba Yaga fleet had spent 12 years training and preparing for exactly this confrontation, studying Imperial tactics down to the smallest detail, while the Empire had spent those same 12 years assuming humanity posed no threat at all. The battle that followed would later be studied in military academies across a dozen civilizations for generations to come. It began with feints and misdirection, human ships slipping through gaps in Imperial formations that shouldn't have existed, striking command ships and coordination vessels before retreating into cover. It continued through hours of brutal, controlled fighting, the human fleet trading numbers for precision, always targeting exactly the ships and systems that would cause the most damage to Imperial coordination and morale. Aboard the Dominion's Will, Threx watched his formations collapse into confusion, his commanders unable to coordinate effectively as human strikes systematically dismantled his communication network. Ship after ship went dark or fell out of formation, not always destroyed, but disabled, isolated, removed from the fight with the same surgical precision the Baba Yaga fleet had shown from the very beginning. How, Threx said quietly, watching his once invincible home fleet crumble around him. How is this possible? We outnumber them 4-1. Because numbers were never the point, Grand Marshal, Vesa said softly beside him, watching the same display with something between horror and grim vindication. You spent 12 years believing they were weak. They spent 12 years preparing for exactly this moment. Numbers don't win against that kind of patience. By the battle's 6th hour, nearly half the Imperial home fleet had been disabled or destroyed, while human losses remained remarkably light. A testament to preparation Threx had never imagined possible from a species he had dismissed as beneath him. And now, with the battle's outcome no longer in doubt, the Baba Yaga fleet turned its full attention toward a single remaining target. The Dominion's Will itself. The Dominion's Will shuddered as another wave of precision strikes tore through its outer defense grid. Grand Marshal Threx stood on his command deck, watching the last of his personal guard fleet fall into disarray around him, and understood with a cold and complete certainty that this battle was already lost. "Status report," he demanded, though he already knew the answer would not be good. "Shields at 30%, his tactical officer said, voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We've lost contact with over half the home fleet. Grand Marshal, they're not trying to destroy us. They're hurting us." Threx looked at the display and saw it was true. Human ships moved with terrible precision, closing off escape routes one by one, forcing the Dominion's will and its remaining escorts into a tightening circle. This was not chaos. This was a trap 12 years in the making, closing exactly as intended. "All remaining ships," Threx said, his voice steadier than he felt, "concentrate fire on the lead cruiser. If we're going to fall, we take as many of them with us as we can." "Belay that order." The voice was Vessa's, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the tension of the command deck. Threx turned to find her standing firm, refusing to back down despite his rank and his fury. "This is not your command to give, Counselor." "Then let me remind you what command actually means, Grand Marshal," Vessa said. "It means understanding when a battle is already decided. Look at the pattern of their strikes. Every single target so far has been chosen with deliberate restraint. They have had a dozen opportunities to simply annihilate us and chose not to. Ask yourself why." Before Threx could answer, every screen on the command deck flickered, replaced by a single image, not a threat, not a weapon, but the calm, steady face of Fleet Admiral Diane Ockhaffer, transmitted from a hidden relay somewhere deep in human space. "Grand Marshal Threx," Ockhaffer said, her voice measured and even. "My name is Fleet Admiral Diane Ockhaffer. I served with General Elena Voss for 30 years. I knew her better than almost anyone alive, and I can tell you with certainty that she did not build this fleet to conquer your empire." Threx said nothing, watching the screen with wary, exhausted eyes. "She built it," Ockhaffer continued, "because she understood that a peace built on threats alone never truly lasts. What you did at Keth Station was murder, Grand Marshal. Cold, deliberate, broadcast for the galaxy to see, meant to prove that humanity could be threatened into submission. This fleet exists to prove that assumption wrong once and completely. Nothing more." "You've destroyed half my home fleet," Threx said, finding his voice at last. "Occupied one of our most important stations. Is this your idea of restraint, Admiral?" "Every strike we have carried out," Ockhaffer said, "has targeted only those responsible for what happened at Keth Station, or those who chose to defend them by force. Not a single civilian world has been touched. Not a single unrelated Imperial citizen has been harmed. We could have ended this war 12 years ago, Grand Marshal, the moment this fleet was ready. We chose not to, because General Voss, General Chen, and General Holt did not want a war of conquest. They wanted a peace that could not be broken by the next ambitious officer who decided humanity looked weak enough to murder." Threx looked around his command deck, at the wreckage of his once mighty home fleet displayed across every screen, and felt something in him finally break, not from fear, but from the sudden, undeniable weight of understanding exactly what he had done. "What do you want from me?" he said quietly. It was not quite a question anymore. It was closer to surrender. "Surrender yourself and those directly responsible for the executions at Keth Station," Ockhaffer said. "Face trial before a joint tribunal, Imperial and human both. Accept new peace terms, negotiated honestly this time, without hidden blades behind hidden smiles. And Grand Marshal, this fleet will return to hiding once this is finished. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your surrender and shame. We want only what we asked for from the very beginning, a peace that will actually hold." For a long moment, Threx said nothing at all. He thought of the 3 generals he had ordered killed, calm and dignified even as his soldiers raised weapons against them. He thought of his own certainty, 12 years wrong, that humanity had grown weak and tired. He thought of Vessa's warnings, dismissed again and again, until it was far too late to matter. "Stand down all remaining ships," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Signal surrender to the human fleet." Vessa let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Around the command deck, Officers moved to comply, some with visible relief, others with the numb shock of men who had watched their entire understanding of the galaxy collapse in the space of a single week. Grand Marshal Threx was taken into human custody 3 hours later, transferred quietly and without incident to a joint tribunal vessel waiting at the edge of the battle site. He did not resist. Something in him, perhaps for the first time in his long military career, understood that resistance would serve no purpose at all. The war, such as it had been, ended not with a treaty signed in celebration, but with a quiet, careful negotiation conducted over the following weeks between Fleet Admiral Akafor and a newly humbled Imperial Council, now led by Councillor Vesicine, who had earned her position through the simple, rare virtue of having been right when it mattered most. The new treaty was not so different from the one that had died with 3 generals at Keth Station, but this time it was built on something sturdier than good intentions alone. Both sides understood, now, exactly what the other was capable of, and in the strange logic of galactic politics, that understanding proved a far stronger foundation for peace than trust ever could have been on its own. Grand Marshal Threx stood trial before the Joint Tribunal 3 months later, alongside 11 other Imperial officers directly responsible for the executions at Keth Station. The trial was broadcast across every world in both territories, a final, complete accounting of what had happened and why. Threx did not deny his actions. He offered no excuses. When asked, near the end of his testimony, why he had ordered the executions, he answered simply. "I believed they were weak," he said. "I believed that mercy and patience were the same as fear. I was wrong, and 3 good people who wanted nothing but peace paid for that mistake with their lives. I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask only that my error serve as a lesson to whoever comes after me." He was sentenced to life imprisonment on a secure Imperial world, stripped of rank and title. It was not the death many had called for, but Fleet Admiral Akafor had insisted, in honor of what the 3 generals themselves would have wanted, that the tribunal show the same restraint humanity had shown throughout the entire conflict. Justice, not vengeance, had always been the point. On a quiet hillside on Earth, 6 months after the events at Keth Station, a memorial was unveiled in honor of Generals Elena Voss, Sarah Chen, and Marcus Holt. It was a simple structure, 3 columns of pale stone rising from a garden, each engraved with a single phrase chosen by those who had known them best. Elena's column read, "Patience is not the absence of strength. It is strength waiting for the right moment." Sarah's column read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied, so long as it arrives complete." Marcus's column read, "The quietest room is often the most dangerous one." Fleet Admiral Diane Akafor stood before the memorial on the day of its unveiling, addressing a crowd that stretched far beyond the hillside, broadcast to every human world, and for the first time in the war's long history, to Imperial worlds as well. "For 12 years, she said, 3 people carried a secret so heavy that most of us never knew it existed. They built something meant to protect us, and prayed every single day that it would never need to wake. It woke because they were murdered for the crime of offering peace honestly. But even in their deaths, they made certain that what followed was not blind vengeance, but justice, controlled and deliberate to the very end, exactly as they had always been in life." She paused, looking out at the crowd, at humans, and, in small numbers, Imperial representatives who had come to pay their respects to the 3 people responsible for ending a war neither side had known how to end honestly. "Let this memorial remind us," Akafor said, "that humanity's greatest strength was never our weapons and never our willingness to fight. It was our patience, our willingness to endure insult and provocation, again and again, waiting for the moment when patience alone could no longer serve peace. That is what Elena, Sarah, and Marcus understood better than anyone. That is what they gave their lives to prove. And that is what the galaxy, at long last, has finally learned to respect." The crowd stood in silence, the wind moving gently through the garden, past 3 columns of pale stone that would stand for generations to come. A quiet reminder that the deepest strength was rarely the loudest, and that the price of underestimating patience was, and would always be, far higher than anyone expected.